Mr. Richard Hale was a man everyone in the city knew. He was a millionaire, the owner of several businesses, and lived in a giant mansion with tall glass windows and shining marble floors. From the outside, he looked like a man who had everything: a rich life, expensive cars, and loyal workers. But inside, Richard was a lonely man. He trusted no one, not even the people who worked for him. His house was always filled with staff, chefs, drivers, cleaners, but to him, they were just workers. He never bothered to know their names. To Richard, money was the only language worth speaking. Among the staff was a quiet maid named Elena. She was different from the others. She never talked much, never complained, and never looked for attention. She came every morning, worked hard, and left silently. Most people didn't even notice her, and Richard almost forgot she existed, until one evening. It was a late night in the mansion. The rain tapped against the windows, and Richard walked through the long hallways, restless. He had just returned from a meeting where his managers argued endlessly but solved nothing. His head was heavy with frustration. As he passed the laundry room, he noticed something strange. On a wooden table, half hidden under folded clothes, there was a small black notebook. It didn't belong there. Curiosity pulled him closer. Richard picked up the notebook, frowning. It was old, the cover worn, the pages filled with neat handwriting. At first, he thought it was just a diary. But when he opened it, his heart skipped a beat. Inside were pages and pages of notes about management, staff organization, and even company strategies. His company strategies. Richard flipped through more pages, his eyes widening. There were clear ideas on how to cut costs, how to motivate workers, how to improve profit margins. Some notes even pointed out mistakes his managers were making, mistakes Richard himself had noticed but never spoken about. How does she know this? Richard whispered. His pulse quickened as he read more. These weren't random thoughts. They were sharp, intelligent observations, almost like the notes of a trained business consultant. But written in a maid's notebook. At the bottom of one page, he saw a line that made him pause. If only I had the chance, I could make a company strong. Even stronger than Mr. Hale's managers. Richard's jaw tightened. His first thought was suspicion. Was someone spying on him? Was the maid secretly working for his rivals, feeding them information? But then another thought crept in. What if she wasn't spying at all? What if she was simply smart? He closed the notebook slowly, his mind racing. He had seen Elena many times, walking quietly through the halls with her head down. She looked so ordinary, so invisible. Could someone like her really write this? The next morning, Richard could not concentrate on his usual work. Numbers blurred on the papers before him, and meetings felt like noise. His mind kept going back to that notebook. He found himself watching Elena as she moved through the mansion, dusting shelves, arranging flowers, folding sheets with calm precision. She carried herself with a kind of quiet discipline, never wasting a moment. Richard narrowed his eyes. He noticed something he had never paid attention to before. She was not only cleaning but also observing. She glanced at how the kitchen staff wasted ingredients, how the guards were sometimes careless, how supplies were misplaced. And every time, she quietly fixed the problem without making a scene. It was strange. She behaved more like a manager than a maid. That evening, when Elena left for the day, Richard returned to the laundry room. The notebook was gone. She had taken it back. This confirmed it. The notebook was hers. But why would a maid keep such notes? Why write about company problems? Why risk so much? Richard felt a storm brewing inside him, half suspicion, half fascination. He couldn't decide whether to fire her immediately, or test her. For a man who believed he had seen everything in life, this was something new. Something unexpected. As he sat in his study that night, staring at the fire, Richard whispered to himself, "What secret are you hiding, Elena?" And for the first time in years, the millionaire felt something unusual: curiosity. The next morning, Richard sat at the head of his long dining table, but his mind wasn't on his breakfast. The golden cutlery, the steaming coffee, the perfectly buttered toast, none of it mattered. All he could think about was the notebook he had found. His eyes flicked toward the corner of the room, where Elena stood quietly, waiting in case he needed something. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look guilty. She simply stood with her hands folded, her face calm as always. How could someone so ordinary write such powerful notes? He thought. Suspicion crept into his chest. Perhaps she was hiding something. Perhaps she was a spy sent by his enemies. Or maybe she was trying to find a way to blackmail him. Richard clenched his fork. He had built his empire by trusting no one. He wasn't about to let a maid outsmart him. Later that day, he decided to test her. When Elena entered the office to dust the bookshelves, Richard deliberately dropped a set of papers on the floor. They were fake business reports he had written just for this moment, filled with errors only an experienced eye would notice. Elena bent down to pick them up. Her eyes moved across the pages for only a second, but Richard caught it. She paused. Her brow furrowed, just slightly, before she placed the papers neatly on his desk. That tiny reaction was enough. She had noticed something. She wasn't just glancing, she was analyzing. Richard leaned back in his chair, his suspicion growing. The next evening, he gave another test. He told the kitchen staff to prepare a lavish dinner, but he ordered them to waste extra ingredients on purpose. He wanted to see if Elena would notice. Sure enough, as she cleared the plates later, Richard caught her quietly collecting the unused food, separating what could still be eaten. She wrapped it carefully and gave it to the servant boy outside, who often went hungry. Richard's chest tightened. This wasn't normal maid behavior. She had the eyes of someone who calculated, managed, and cared for details. But was she using this ability for good, or for some hidden plan? That night, Richard sat in his study, staring at the fire. He had another thought. Maybe the notebook wasn't about spying. Maybe it was something personal. But if that was true, why keep it hidden? Why write down so many dangerous details about his company? The question burned inside him until he could no longer sit still. He needed answers. The following day, Richard followed Elena without her noticing. He watched from a distance as she moved through the mansion. She worked quickly, never wasting time, but there was something unusual in the way she moved from room to room. In the library, she paused to look at the rows of business books. She never touched them, but her eyes lingered, almost as if she wished she could read them. In the garden, she stopped to give the gardener a better idea for arranging the tools, saving time and effort. In the pantry, she quietly reorganized the shelves so the staff could find items faster. Richard narrowed his eyes. She wasn't just cleaning. She was managing. And no one even noticed. That evening, Richard finally decided to confront her, but not directly. Instead, he walked into the laundry room while she was folding clothes. "Elena," he said, his tone sharp but calm, "tell me something. Do you enjoy working here?" She looked up, surprised. "Yes, sir. I am grateful for the job." "Do you only clean," he asked slowly, "or do you watch?" Her hands froze for just a second, but then she lowered her eyes. "I only do what I'm told, sir." Richard studied her face. She wasn't lying, at least, not completely. He leaned closer. "You carry a notebook, don't you?" Her eyes widened ever so slightly, and her fingers trembled. For the first time, Richard saw fear in her expression. He smirked. "Don't worry. I'm not angry. I'm simply curious." Elena quickly shook her head. "It is nothing important, sir. Just my own thoughts." But Richard didn't believe her. He could see the truth in her eyes. That night, as he lay awake in his giant bed, Richard realized something. This maid was not ordinary. She was hiding something powerful, something that could either destroy him or change everything. He remembered the line in the notebook, "If only I had the chance, I could make a company strong." What did she mean by that? Was she secretly dreaming of replacing him? Or was she simply a genius trapped in the wrong life? Richard turned to the ceiling, his eyes sharp in the dark. Whatever the truth was, he would find it. And when he did, he promised himself, he would make Elena reveal every secret she carried. For the next 2 days, Richard could not think of anything else. Every time he saw Elena moving quietly through the mansion, his mind returned to the notebook. Those sharp notes, those clever ideas, how could they come from a maid who lived such a simple life? Finally, one late evening, Richard decided he had waited long enough. He needed the truth. Elena had just finished cleaning the dining hall when Richard's voice echoed from across the room. "Elena," he said firmly, "come to my study." Her heart skipped. The tone of his voice was different. Not commanding like usual, not casual, it was sharp, serious. She nodded silently and followed him down the hallway. The study was dark except for the glow of a fire in the fireplace. Heavy curtains shut out the night. Richard closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch clicking making her chest tighten. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to a chair across from his desk. Elena sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel his eyes studying her, heavy and searching. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Then, without another word, he placed the small black notebook on the table between them. Her breath caught. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The fire crackled. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Finally, Richard spoke. His voice was low, almost dangerous. "This is yours, isn't it?" Elena's hands trembled. She lowered her eyes, but she couldn't lie. "Yes, sir. It is mine." Richard's jaw tightened. "Why?" Elena's lips parted, but no words came out. "Why does a maid," Richard pressed, his tone rising, "keep notes about my company? About my managers? About business strategies? Who are you working for? Tell me." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "I'm not working for anyone, sir. I swear. The notes, they are mine." "Then why write them?" Richard demanded. "Do you want to sell them? Do you want to use them against me?" Elena shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "No. I would never harm you. Please, believe me." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, making her flinch. "Then explain yourself." Her tears finally spilled, but her voice grew steady. "I write those notes because it's the only dream I have left." Richard blinked. "Dream?" Elena wiped her face, her voice breaking but strong. "I may be your maid now, sir, but I was not always like this. My father, he once had a small shop. I helped him manage it. I learned how to deal with suppliers, how to organize workers, how to keep accounts. I loved it. But when my father died, everything collapsed. We lost the shop. We lost our home. I had to take any job I could find. That is how I ended up here." Her voice grew softer. "But I never let the dream die. I still write. I still think of ideas, even if no one ever sees them. The notebook, it's not for spying. It's my way of remembering who I used to be, and who I still hope I can become." Richard's eyes narrowed, studying her face. For the first time, he saw not just a maid, but a woman carrying years of pain, yet refusing to let go of hope. Silence stretched again. The crackling fire was the only sound. Finally, Richard leaned back in his chair. His suspicion had not fully vanished, but something inside him had shifted. "You expect me to believe," he said slowly, "that these notes are just dreams?" Elena met his eyes, her tears still shining. "Yes. Because that's all I have. A dream and a notebook. Nothing more." Her honesty struck him harder than any clever excuse. Richard picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages again. The ideas were sharp. The strategies were powerful. No rival spy could have written with such sincerity. He closed it and placed it back on the desk. "If what you say is true, Elena, then you are not ordinary." Her eyes widened in shock. Richard stood, walking toward the window, his hands behind his back. "But tell me, why did you never show this to anyone? Why hide your thoughts like some shameful secret?" Elena's voice trembled. "Because no one would listen. Who would believe a maid could understand business? People like me are invisible, sir. We clean floors, we wash dishes, but we are never taken seriously. If I told anyone my ideas, they would laugh." Richard turned back, his face unreadable. "And yet, your ideas could outsmart men I pay millions to." Her cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. The silence grew heavy again until Richard finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You may not know this, Elena, but you have just put yourself in great danger. Your intelligence is not something I can ignore. And now, I must decide, should I see you as a threat, or as something else?" Elena's heart pounded. She didn't know what he meant. Richard stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Tomorrow, I will give you a test. If you pass, you may prove that your notes are more than scribbles. If you fail," he paused, his voice chilling, "you may not belong here anymore." Elena swallowed hard, fear and hope mixing inside her chest. The notebook lay on the desk, silent but powerful, a symbol of her secret life now exposed. And as she left the study that night, her heart trembled with one thought: her life would never be the same again. The next morning, Elena woke up with heavy eyes. She had barely slept the whole night. Richard's words echoed in her mind: "Tomorrow, I will give you a test." She didn't know what kind of test it would be. Would it be simple? Or would it be something designed to make her fail? Still, she dressed in her plain maid's uniform and tied her hair back as usual. She had no choice but to face whatever awaited her. Richard sat in his office, waiting. He had already prepared everything. Today would show him whether Elena was truly the genius her notebook suggested, or just a maid with dangerous fantasies. When Elena entered, he pointed to a chair. "Sit." On the desk in front of him were several folders filled with papers. "These," Richard said coldly, "are reports from one of my smaller companies. The managers claim everything is fine. But I suspect there are problems." He slid the folders toward her. "You have 1 hour. Look at these papers. Tell me if you see anything wrong." Elena's hands shook as she opened the first folder. She had never been tested like this before. But as her eyes scanned the pages, her fear slowly gave way to focus. For the first 15 minutes, she said nothing. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed together. Richard watched her closely, looking for signs of hesitation. Then, quietly, Elena spoke. "These numbers, they do not add up." Richard's eyes sharpened. "Explain." She pointed at the page. "Here it says the company made a profit. But if you follow the supply costs here, it shows a loss. Someone is hiding money, sir." Richard leaned forward. He had suspected the same thing, but hearing her notice it so quickly made his chest tighten. She turned the page. "And here, the workers' hours are marked wrong. It says they worked less, but from the shipment records, they worked more. That means someone is cheating them of their pay." Her voice grew firmer as she went on, page after page. She saw mistakes, lies, hidden losses, things even Richard's managers had failed to detect. By the time the hour ended, she had pointed out 5 major problems. Problems Richard knew were real. Silence filled the room. Richard stared at her across the desk, his eyes unreadable. Elena lowered her gaze, afraid to speak. Finally, Richard said, "How did you learn to see all of this?" Elena clasped her hands together. "I told you, sir. I used to help my father with his shop. I had to make every coin count. I learned to see what others ignored." Richard leaned back slowly, his mind racing. She had passed the test. More than that, she had exceeded it. But he wasn't ready to let her know. Not yet. Instead, Richard rose to his feet. "You did well," he admitted. "But this was only numbers on paper. Real business is not only numbers, it is people, choices, risks." He walked around the desk, standing close to her. His voice dropped lower. "So I will give you another test. A real one." Elena's heart pounded. "Another?" "Yes," Richard said. "Tonight, I am meeting with my board of directors. They are proud men. They believe they know everything. You will stand in that room with me. You will not speak, only watch. And later, you will tell me what you saw. Who lied? Who hid fear? Who wanted power? Do you understand?" Elena's breath caught. To stand in a room with millionaires and powerful men? She had never imagined such a thing. But she nodded. "I understand, sir." Richard studied her for a long moment. "Good. You may go." That evening, Elena stood nervously outside the grand boardroom. She could hear the voices of powerful men inside, laughing and arguing. She adjusted her simple maid's uniform, feeling out of place. When Richard entered, he gestured for her to follow. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Some men frowned. Some raised eyebrows. A maid in the boardroom was unheard of. "She is here to take notes," Richard lied smoothly. "Ignore her." The meeting began. Elena stood quietly in the corner, pretending to write. But her eyes scanned the room, her ears catching every tone, every glance. One man smiled too quickly when he spoke of profits. Another tapped his pen nervously whenever Richard mentioned a project. A third avoided Richard's eyes when asked a direct question. Elena said nothing, but she saw everything. After 2 long hours, the meeting ended. Richard dismissed the board and called Elena to his study. "Well," he asked, folding his arms. "What did you see?" Elena hesitated, then spoke softly. "The man with the red tie, he was lying about the numbers. He smiled too much. He wanted to hide something. The man with the pen, he is afraid. And the one with the glasses, he does not support you. He wants another man to lead." Richard froze. Every word she spoke matched what he himself had suspected for months. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "You are not ordinary, Elena," he whispered. Elena's heart raced. She had passed again. But deep inside, she wondered, what would this mean for her future? The next morning, Richard sat at his breakfast table, but his thoughts were far from his food. He kept hearing Elena's quiet voice in his mind, pointing out truths no one else dared to say. For years, Richard had trusted his expensive managers, his board members, and his advisors. But this maid, this quiet young woman who cleaned his floors, had seen through lies and corruption in only a few hours. He could not ignore it anymore. Elena was special. Later that day, Richard called Elena to his study. She entered carefully, unsure of what awaited her. He stood near the window, his back straight, his face serious. "Elena," he said, "you surprised me." She lowered her eyes. "I only told you what I saw, sir." Richard turned, studying her. "No. You did more than that. You saw what others missed. You have a gift. And now, I cannot keep it hidden." Elena's eyes widened. "What do you mean, sir?" Richard's voice grew firm. "Tonight, I am hosting a dinner with some of my closest partners. I will introduce you to them, not as a maid, but as someone who will help me. Someone I trust." Her breath caught. "Me? But, sir, I am just—" "You are not just anything," Richard interrupted sharply. "Do not call yourself only a maid. Not anymore." That evening, the grand dining hall shone with golden lights. The long table was filled with rich men in fine suits, their wives glittering in jewels. Elena stood near the edge of the room, her hands clasped tightly together, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt out of place in her plain dress. She wished she could disappear. Then Richard stood, raising his glass. "Gentlemen," he announced, "tonight I want you to meet someone important. This is Elena." Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some curious, some shocked. Richard continued, "She has helped me uncover truths that even my managers failed to see. She has the eyes of a leader. From today, she will work by my side." A murmur spread across the table. Some men exchanged looks of disbelief. A maid? Working with Richard? Impossible. One man, Mr. Gray, stood with a tight smile. "Sir, with respect, she is a servant. How can you trust her with matters of business?" Richard's gaze hardened. "Because she has already proven herself. She saw through your false reports, Mr. Gray. She noticed your lies." The room fell silent. Mr. Gray's face turned pale. Elena's heart pounded. She hadn't realized Richard would expose someone so openly. The air in the hall grew heavy. Mr. Gray muttered something under his breath and sat down, his face burning with shame. Richard looked around the table, his voice sharp. "Do not underestimate her because of where she comes from. Talent does not wear a uniform. And from now on, Elena will have my full support." After dinner, the guests left, some whispering behind Richard's back, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Elena stood quietly, her hands still trembling. "Sir," she whispered, "you should not have done that. They will hate me." Richard walked closer, his voice calm. "Let them. I have built my empire by ignoring small minds. If they hate you, it only proves they fear you." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I am not strong like you. I do not know if I can survive in their world." Richard studied her, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Elena, strength is not about shouting the loudest. It is about seeing clearly when others are blind. You already have that strength." But outside the mansion, trouble was brewing. Mr. Gray, humiliated and angry, met secretly with two other board members. "We cannot let this maid rise," he hissed. "If Richard trusts her, she will see all of our secrets. We will lose everything." The men exchanged dark looks. "What do you suggest?" Mr. Gray's eyes narrowed. "We must remove her. Quietly." Back inside, Elena returned to her small servant's room, her heart heavy with mixed feelings. Richard's trust gave her hope, but the cold glares at the dinner table still haunted her. She sat on the edge of her bed, opening her notebook. Her hand trembled as she wrote a single line. "The higher you climb, the stronger the winds." She knew danger was coming. But she also knew she could not turn back. For the first time in years, she was standing close to her dream. And she would not let it go, no matter the cost. The next few days were restless inside Richard's mansion. The air seemed heavy, filled with whispers and suspicious glances. Elena could feel it. The other staff looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with jealousy, and others with quiet fear. But what troubled her most was the cold silence from certain board members. Men like Mr. Gray, who once ignored her, now watched her closely. Their eyes were sharp, unfriendly, and dangerous. One evening, Richard called Elena into his office. His face looked tired, but his voice was steady. "Elena," he said, "I know you have felt the tension. There are men who do not want you here. They see you as a threat." Elena lowered her head. "I never wanted enemies, sir. I only wanted to help." Richard's lips curved into a faint smile. "That is why they fear you. Because you are honest, and honesty destroys their lies." He leaned forward, his voice quieter. "But be careful. They will not stop easily." Elena nodded, though her heart was heavy. The very next day, Richard held another meeting with his partners. Elena once again stood quietly in the corner, pretending to take notes. But the atmosphere was different this time. The men's voices were sharper, their words filled with hidden poison. Mr. Gray suddenly stood up, slamming a folder on the table. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted. "Sir, you are blinded. This woman is not a genius. She is a liar. A thief." The room went silent. Everyone turned toward Elena. Her face went pale. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself, Mr. Gray." Mr. Gray opened the folder and threw papers across the table. "Look. These are copies of her so-called notes. Ideas stolen from our meetings. She has been spying, writing down everything we say. She is using you, Richard." Gasps filled the room. Some men nodded, their suspicions confirmed. Elena's hands shook. "No. Those are my own notes. My own ideas. I never stole anything." But the men ignored her. Their voices rose in anger, accusing, judging. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Silence." The room froze. His eyes burned as he stared at Mr. Gray. "Do you think I am a fool? I have known of your lies for months. I tested you, and Elena saw the truth before any of you dared admit it." He lifted one of the scattered papers. "These notes are not stolen. They are pure. Honest. If you doubt her, you doubt me." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Richard turned to Elena. "Show them." Her breath caught. "Sir." "Show them your notebook. Show them the truth." With trembling hands, Elena pulled out her small, worn notebook. She placed it on the table. Richard flipped through the pages, his voice steady. "These are not copies. These are years of thoughts. Strategies written long before she ever stood in this room. She is not a thief. She is a mind sharper than any of you." The room fell silent. Elena's eyes brimmed with tears. For years, her notebook had been nothing more than a secret dream. Now it was her shield, her proof, her power. Richard closed the notebook and placed it gently in her hands. "Gentlemen," he said firmly, "you will respect her. From today, Elena is no longer a maid. She will work beside me, as my advisor." The men shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared argue. Richard's voice left no room for doubt. That night, when the mansion was quiet, Elena sat alone in the garden. The stars sparkled above her, and her notebook lay open on her lap. She thought of her father, of the small shop they once had, of all the years she spent scrubbing floors while her dreams gathered dust. Now, for the first time, she felt those dreams breathing again. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of hope. Richard walked out quietly, standing beside her. "You did well today," he said softly. She looked up, her voice breaking. "I was so afraid, sir. For a moment, I thought everything would be destroyed." Richard shook his head. "The truth always rises, Elena. Lies can only stand for so long." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "From today, your life changes. You are not a maid anymore. You are something greater." Elena looked at her notebook, then at the stars. A small smile touched her lips. "My father always said," she whispered, "dreams never die. They only wait for their time." Richard's eyes softened. "And your time has come." The night air was cool, carrying the scent of roses from the garden. Elena closed her notebook, holding it close to her heart. The secret was no longer hidden. The truth was exposed. And for the first time, she was not invisible. She was seen. She was valued. She was free to dream again.